Welcome to the McGraw-Hill Education Actionable Assessment webinar. The title of this webinar is Student Success on High-Stakes Assessments. This is Dr. Kay Antonelli, Assistant Superintendent for Instruction at Penn Harris-Madison School Corporation in Mishawaka, Indiana. It's an honor to meet with you today and to share how the consistent use of formative assessment has changed the climate of learning and student achievement in our district, Penn Harris-Madison. The purpose of today's webinar is to share some strategies that have authentically worked for us and for our students. You may find that you're already using some of these strategies, and if so, it helps to hear that others are using some of the same techniques for the same philosophical reasons. There may also be some ideas that are new to you, and we hope that you can take away an idea that you and your team would be willing to try. This isn't a one-size-fits-all program. Instead, it's strategies that you can develop and customize for your individual learning environment. And most importantly, it's about process and the process of using formative assessment every day to assess student learning. We have found that in changing the climate of learning in our district, we have also reformatted learning for ourselves as professionals and as learners. Some of the takeaways in today's webinar include the essentials of professional development, the power of team, and how increased teacher resources have helped our teachers drill down and focus on individual student need. This short video explains more about our formative assessment and about our district.
Dr. Kay Antonelli, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Instruction at Penn Harris-Madison School Corporation in Mishawaka, Indiana. My role as Assistant Superintendent is that of working with the principals in regard to curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Today I'm going to be talking with you about the role of formative assessment and how this has absolutely changed the climate of learning at Penn Harris-Madison, and it's also led to the greatest student achievement in the history of our district. We know that summative assessment serves a purpose, and the purpose is usually looking at mastery of learning at the end of a course or at the end of a learning experience. But we also know that formative assessment is an essential part of the process so that teachers can come back in and know where a student's strengths are and also those areas where additional help is needed. So the just-in-time component of formative assessment is a real key factor. Our district has been involved with formative assessment for the past 5 years. This includes the use of Acuity for a more formal formative assessment, but then also corporation, school, and teacher-developed formative assessment. Today's webinar will focus on formative assessment and all of the strategies that have helped us authentically address our student needs. We'll focus on how this has authentically helped us to increase student achievement, and this is throughout the year relative to our state standards and critical skills that students need to develop and be able to show, but then also relative to summative testing, such as high-stakes year-end testing.
It's important to share some information about our district, and the purpose in doing so is to share the criteria by which we're compared to other districts in the state of Indiana. It's also important to share this information because of the fidelity by which our teachers use formative assessment, and this has played a key role in the data that you see reflected here. There are over 300 districts in the state of Indiana, and Indiana currently uses a grading system for overall district grades as well as individual grades. PHM is one of the larger districts in the state, and our corporation has a district grade of an A as well as the letter grade of A for each one of our schools. We have 11 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, and 1 high school of approximately 3,500 students. About half of our elementary student population is located at our Title I schools. Over the past 7 years, student achievement has risen dramatically at Penn High School. For example, the graduation rate has soared from 79% to 97.7% during this time. This increase in the graduation rate is indicative of several initiatives that Penn High School has implemented over these years, and the consistent use of formative assessment is one of those initiatives. Through the use of formative assessment, secondary teachers and administrators have been able to keep in touch with student learning in a timely way rather than at the end of a semester when the student didn't earn their credit. In this way, we have more students staying on track during their years in high school, as well as ultimately graduating from high school. In fact, our students in special populations, such as our students who are new language learners, students with IEPs and special education, and our students from impoverished backgrounds are successfully completing high school and being prepared for college and career opportunities following graduation from high school. A great example of how formative assessment has helped our students in high-stakes testing is represented by student success in Algebra 1 and English 10. In Indiana, our students must show proficiency in these two areas of study in our year-end high-stakes test. In 2015, over 92% of the students passed Algebra 1 and English 10. We have used Acuity for the past 5 years, and this formative assessment is administered 3 times yearly. Truly, it helps identify areas of student need. In addition to Acuity, the teachers have also developed formative assessments that can be administered more frequently, so they have a constant awareness of where additional help is required. Steve Hope, who's principal at Penn High School, asks his teachers to use an informal formative assessment every 15 minutes during class as a check for understanding. Getting into the practice of using different kinds of formative assessment in the classroom is part of redefining what we do in the learning process. These informal assessments or checks for understanding have reconfigured the learning environment in our high school classes. In our state, we refer to 90-25-90 as the goals that we want all high schools to achieve. This means a goal of a minimum of 90% as a graduation rate, 25% of the students taking rigorous advanced placement and dual credit courses, and Penn High School has approximately 64% of the students taking those rigorous courses, and 90% of the students passing high-stakes assessments. The process of continuous cycle of teaching, reteaching, practice, and assessment has led to increased student achievement for all of our students. It's also important to look at the variance between our student scores and the scores of students throughout the state. Each year when the Indiana Department of Education releases data, we look at it closely so that we're able to benchmark our progress and the preparation of our students. In this slide, we're looking at ISTEP, which is our statewide summative assessment, and this is for mathematics in grades 3 through 8. It's important to know that this data reflects the 2015 summative assessment, and during this assessment, we had changes in both the state standards and the changes in the state summative assessment. As you can see, the variance over state average ranges from 13% to 26% across grades 3 through 8. This is actually the greatest variance over state history or state average in the history of our district. Over the past few years, we knew that we needed to stay the course with formative assessment. It would have been easy to have a knee-jerk reaction to the changes in standards and assessment and throw out a good practice because of fear of the assessment. And it was also a very rigorous assessment at that. However, we knew that the process we were using was a good one that led to effective learning, and so what we see are the results with the data. I have a few more slides so that you can look at variance. This is also with English Language Arts for the 2015 ISTEP. And here we're looking at a variance from 12 to 17% over the state average. We knew that the summative assessment last year would focus on greater degrees of deep and extended reading and writing. And over the course of the past few years, we've increased our focus on the rigor in these areas. So areas that we focused on in formative assessment included multi-step strategic performance tasks that required students to read and write in order to formulate their responses. Through the use of performance tasks, we were able to help our students build their skills in strategic thinking, their expertise in content language, and their stamina for deep and extended levels of thinking, reading, and writing. In this way, we also were able to help build our students' capabilities to respond beyond mere recall of information to a far more in-depth cognitive process of analysis, synthesis, and innovative thinking. In the next few slides, I want to share some information about special populations and state variance with these groups of students. In this slide, we are looking at the variance of high-ability students in mathematics. In some states, these students may be referred to as gifted and talented or under some other title. However, these are students who are identified as a result of both aptitude and achievement. As you can see, our students scored from 17 to 22% over the same group of students across the state. In variance. And it's important to know that we've also focused on not only reading workshop, but also writing workshop models. In the last two slides, I'll share the variance of our students who are new language learners who have an IEP or in special education, or who are identified as students of poverty. In the first slide, we again are looking at the 2015 Indiana I-STEP English Language Arts Assessment, and this would be for grades 3 through 8. As you can see, our students who are identified with these populations scored several percentage points over the state average. For example, our students who are represented by free and reduced lunch services scored 11% over state average. Students with an IEP in special education scored 13% over state average. And our students who are new language learners scored 24% over the students around the state. The last look at data is for mathematics. And as you can see, this is also for our populations for free and reduced, special education, and new language learners. The variance results are 14% for free and reduced, 16% over for students in special education, and 26% that is important for all students. It was especially validating to witness this in the data on the summative assessments. We also know that students who are involved in the RTI process greatly prosper from the use of formative assessment. We can sum it up when we talk about the process of good learning every day. There are 6 strategies that we want to be able to talk about in the webinar, and these strategies contribute to good learning every day. The 6 strategies include the essential role of professional development, transforming the learning process, building and reformatting the power of team, authentic preparation for college and careers, strengthening teacher resources, and collaborative partnership for learning. While each of these strategies is listed and presented separately, each are interwoven intrinsically and interdependently. While we need a plan of action for each strategy, we must plan and think holistically for all of them. In each of these strategies, the use of formative assessment has been a central factor. In the next short video, our superintendent, Dr. Jerry Thacker, talks about strategy number 1 and the role of professional development. He emphasizes how focused and sustained professional development shapes and reshapes mindset, practices, and culture for both students and teachers. Professional development has been ongoing with a consistent focus on the effective use of formative assessment over the past 5 years. Let's listen to what
Dr. Jerry Thacker, Superintendent of the Penn Harris-Madison School Corporation. Professional development is the key to continuous improvement in any organization, and our classroom teachers are the key to academic success for our students. So if we want our students to be successful in college and career opportunities, we must invest in professional development for our teachers. It's imperative that they grow every single day, every single year throughout their careers. Professional development should be ongoing and systemic. It's most effective if we have organizational goals for the school district, if we have goals for the individual schools, for the departments, for grade levels, for grade level teams, and of course for the individual. The research shows that ongoing professional development with a component of peer coaching or supervisor coaching has an implementation rate of over 90%. And the one-shot in-services have a success rate for implementation of only about 10%. So we make sure that we have a systemic, ongoing, relevant, and focused professional development plan. Professional development should also include teacher evaluation as a component, because teacher evaluation is exactly that, helping people grow professionally. One of the reasons the Penn Harris-Madison School Corporation achieves at a high level is that we emphasize a triangle of success that connects the students, teachers, and the parents. It's extremely important in professional development to also focus on building relationships and partnerships with students and parents. Highly effective professional development programs should encourage, empower, and inspire our teachers to control the destiny of the learning in their classrooms.
As Dr. Thacker points out, professional development is the key that transforms learning, and the buy-in has to be represented in all areas of the district. He points out that the one-shot attempts at professional development have little impact and rarely any sustainability. Professional development has to be important enough to allocate the resources that generate and sustain the areas of focus and desired change and impact. When we talk about resources, what exactly are we referring to? To be exact, we're talking about financial resources, human resources, tangible resources for curriculum, instruction, and assessment, such as textbooks, software, programs, assessment programs such as Acuity, time, and most importantly, district support. All of these must be planned for, to be appropriately used for professional development, and that is going to produce the desired changes. There have been numerous research studies focusing on the cognitive processes of learning, diverse learning styles, instructional strategies, and practices that encompass all learners in the classroom, and the use of formative assessment in the learning cycle. However, we also know that there's a process of acceptance and transition from theory to practice, as well as the years that it takes to truly become what we do in school and what we do well. The transition into the use of formative assessment as part of the learning cycle has been about changing the culture of learning in our district. The data that I shared with you is as much of an illustration of our own learning as a professional learning community as it is about our students' learning. We know that there's a continuum of knowledge, skills, and applications for teachers as well as our students. The next strategy is about transforming the learning process, and this has also been part of the journey. We know that the cycle of learning consists of several essential phases that learners must be immersed in, such as the presentation of new information, having the opportunity to practice, apply the new information, receiving timely feedback from the teacher about how well they've done and whether they need more practice, perhaps additional practice, more reteaching, and bringing more new learning into the process. One of the things that's really important in this process is whether or not the conversation that can take place between the student and the teacher is without value in terms of a grade or in terms of whether they receive some other outcome. And so it needs to be on the acquisition of skills. And so when the teacher talks with the student and when the student asks questions, it's about what more do I need to focus on? Well, let's try this. Let's look at this concept in this way. We understand that it's essential for a learning environment to reflect a safe learning environment where students are able to take risks when they learn. We can create and contribute to a safe learning environment in several ways. We understand that individuals learn differently and at different rates. In fact, we each represent very complex learning styles depending on content, instructional techniques, etc. Not leaving children behind to struggle while others move on is equally important to encouraging students to take risks and to be inquisitive in their thinking. Through formative assessment, it levels the playing field so that all students learn and develop critical skills in the appropriate time frame. Professional development has encompassed the totality of curriculum, instruction, and assessment, as all three of these aspects of learning are totally tied together. For example, what are the standards really asking students to be able to know and do? In looking at the standards, we also ascertain what the depth of knowledge is for that particular standard. Is the standard asking for the students to provide basic recall of facts and information? Or is the standard asking a student to compare, analyze, or synthesize information? Creative processes are the most complex processes, and it's essential that we understand the need and interdependence of the depth of knowledge. How can we revise our instruction to meet the needs of learners more effectively? In working with our teachers, we ask them to develop their lesson plans with 2 or 3 different approaches where they can incorporate different learning styles that can be used to present difficult concepts. In this way, when a student doesn't get that particular concept, the teachers have at their fingertips a different way to bring clarity to a concept. In this way, the playing field is leveled for the students to gain understanding through instruction that makes sense to them. Learning about and developing a working understanding of the kinds of formative assessments is critical. Each day we should use informal formative assessment as a means to gauge student grasp of concepts. This can happen both verbally and through written language and the way that the teacher communicates with the students, whether or not questions are asked that allow students to be able to use vocabulary, whether they can express whether or not they've gained meaning. Engaging students in conversation in context is a key example of informal formative assessment. Questioning techniques, projects, performance tasks are also methods to gauge student understanding in the classroom without a quiz or test. Exit cards, programs like Kahoot allow teachers to keep their finger on the pulse of student learning. More formal formative assessment includes teacher-developed assessments that periodically assess students on critical standards. As a corporation, we've developed and refined these each year as we've moved through the process. For example, the middle school math and language arts teachers have just refined their 4-week formative assessments for all students that we'll use next year across the district. These assessments have been aligned with the curriculum maps, and we use these as our guide as we work through the school year. With a focus on the curriculum maps and the structured use of formative assessments, this allows the teachers to keep in step with the essential or the critical standards. Lastly, formal formative assessment such as Acuity is delivered 3 times during the school year, and in these assessments, Acuity reflects the Indiana academic standards, so we have an indication as to whether the students grasp the critical standards prior to the summative assessment. So with both formal and informal formative assessments, the goal is to benchmark student acquisition of knowledge and skills and be able to provide just-in-time reteaching for students who need additional time and additional help. Lastly, and most importantly, formative assessment is feedback that is timely, specific, understandable, and actionable for both the teacher and the student. Strategy 3 is about building and reformatting the power of team. And this is one of the great benefits that can happen as a result of the authentic use of formative assessments as a learning community. When I was putting this presentation together, I Googled professional learning community, and the following definition was provided. A professional learning community, or PLC, is a group of educators who meet regularly, share expertise, and work collaboratively to improve teaching skills and academic performance of students. As with many definitions, it can be words on paper, or it can be a reflection of what really is. In the process, it needs to be natural and be able to proceed from words on paper and procedure that is stiff and unnatural to something that grows into a process that's natural and actually reflects what transpires in school each day. We encourage you to stay the course and to focus on what we do as a learning community, and the transition becomes far more natural as the merits of the process begin to speak for themselves. During these professional meetings, teachers learn and problem solve together. This process is immensely meaningful in the evolution of a healthy, functioning team. As a team, they become more discerning and specific about the criteria for student success. They also begin to share resources and work collectively rather than independently. As teachers, we take great pride in our students' learning. The professional learning communities expand our world from our immediate classroom to our school as well as across the district. Because the discussion focuses on the data that transpires as a result of formative assessment, the conversation among professionals often spirals back to instructional strategies and strategic questioning. All individuals have a voice and become leaders in the process. It becomes a give and take, share and learn. Earlier, we talked about the importance for students to learn in supportive environments. The same is true for us as professionals. It's critical to have the safety of a professional learning community where we can take risks that contribute to our own professional growth. Here, just in the allocation of resources, district administration must safeguard and support the time for professionals to meet and to work together, as well as safeguarding the climate of the learning community. By meeting together, this naturally provides the opportunities for teachers to discuss what more the students require in addition to time and help. It becomes the integration for response to instruction. In some instances, teachers regroup students or develop other ways to direct instruction for small groups. Often we've heard teachers lament that they have so much data and do not know how to respond to any of it. In this process, the formative assessments are most effective when they focus upon the critical standards that can be readdressed in a short time frame. In this way, students are not left behind with very little hope of catching up. And when teachers are working with smaller amounts of data, that allows them to strategically act upon those immediately. In the next video, Mr. Nathan Boyd, principal at Grissom Middle School, points out how a healthy team works together to consistently address student needs and outcomes.
Nathan Boyd, principal of Grissom Middle School, Penn Madison School District. So we're creating this environment, a very at ease climate where teachers can bring these items and discuss openly the data that they are getting from their students. They're getting to a point to where, we can share very openly and have an open door sort of philosophy to where individuals can come in and out of the classroom because we're looking at your lesson plans and we are giving suggestions on how we can fine tune and kind of steal those great strategies and pull them together. The climate of looking at this data and these formative assessments also creates an RTI, response to intervention, that is occurring in our classrooms. And that's where we want to continue this movement to go. When it's right fresh in our classrooms, again, students are having success and greater success because we're identifying where those speed bumps are now, rather than waiting 6 and 8 weeks out before we notice a student is having these major difficulties.
Mr. Boyd has used the word open several times to describe what transpires within a learning community when the climate allows for the give and take among professionals. He describes how the use of data brings student learning to the forefront and how teachers intervene with strategies far sooner than later. The data is derived from district-built formative assessments that are based on critical standards every 4 weeks, as well as the formal acuity assessments that are administered 3 times during the school year. In addition to this, teachers also develop methods for less formal daily assessments and use this information to direct the learning process. This procedure allows for addressing learning solutions now rather than later. Mr. Boyd also refers to the open door policy, and this is a byproduct of a very healthy learning environment. It isn't an actual policy, but instead the practice of teachers observing one another for best practices and for the sharing of instructional strategies. This can happen when the individuals have developed trust in one another, as well as consistent collective practice. This next slide takes us to our first polling question. And the polling question is, who owns the data? Let's take a few moments to respond to this question. There are several answers that individuals may have supplied. For example, it could be that the students own the data. It could be that the teachers own the data. Perhaps it's the administrator who owns the data. Maybe it's the parents. This question was raised during the discussion with our administrative team a while back, and it actually was the aha moment for us. We realized that generally there would be one primary response, and that would be that it would be the school administrator who owned the data, and perhaps the teachers. In actuality, student data should be owned collectively by administration, teachers, students, and the student's family. When this truly happens, the process has reached a level of authenticity that is indicative of a change in culture. So one of the areas that we know that we want to continue to work on is to bring our students more actively into this role of owning the information, owning the data, being able to track their progress, and be able to look for their own student success and be able to monitor that. The next strategy encompasses the authentic preparation for college and careers and emphasizes how the integration of formative assessment along with curriculum and instruction, our students are more appropriately prepared for the rigors of college and career standards. How could this be? Well, it's because during the learning process, we found that more students are reading and writing on grade level and keeping pace rather than falling behind. The new standards represent more rigorous problem-solving skills, multi-step strategic problems, and deeper levels of reading and writing. I want to illustrate this point by going back to the data that I shared earlier for all of our students, as well as the students represented special populations. We know and understand that high-stakes summative assessments are only part of the story. The rest encompasses whether the students are prepared for the next level of academic rigor as they move from grade level to grade level. With the consistent use of formative assessment and a specified plan for intervention when students struggle, we aren't leaving our students behind, especially the students in our special populations. Previously, I referred to the use of another kind of formative assessment called a performance task, and I would encourage you to incorporate these types of practices into the learning environment. A performance task is a multi-step problem that is often embedded with deep reading, writing, and research for information. A performance task also asks students to incorporate higher levels of cognitive processes beyond the depth of knowledge 1 or 2. These types of assessments are also critical in challenging our students as well as providing them with the types of challenging problems and types of thinking that are representative of 21st century learning. Strategy number 5 revolves around strengthening teacher resources. Another benefit of collaborative professional learning communities consists of the shared responsibility for our students. With the increased rigor of the state standards, focus on diverse instructional strategies, and individualized plans when students need more time and help, it's essential that we all work together. In the beginning of the webinar, I talked about how essential it is for district support with resources such as financial resources, human resources, tangible resources for curriculum instruction and assessment, such as textbooks, software programs, and time, and most importantly, district support. For example, investing in the resources for formative assessment is also necessary that teachers have access to timely and relevant data, as well as a wide variety of instructional resources. We found this with Acuity and believe that the investment has paid off relative to preparing our students on grade level standards, as well as for high-stakes summative assessments. It's critical for the district to share the responsibility and to provide as much support as possible for our teachers so that they can collectively meet the needs of students. In the next video segment, you'll see how our district responded with additional Acuity resources and professional development to help facilitate the process and response to student data.
Hello and welcome. We are privileged to have the opportunity to work with the educators of Penn Madison to bring you the On to the Finish Line Standards and Skills Resource Program. We are excited to share these resources with you today. As we've worked through providing this to you, we've tried to streamline the process and make the resources easy to navigate. As you watch this presentation today, please note that at the bottom of the window where you're viewing the slides and videos, you can pause the presentation as well as go back to rewatch any part of it. With that, let's get started with today's objectives. So today's session has several objectives. The first one is that we want to introduce the On to the Finish Line Standards and Skills Resource Program and explain to you exactly what the program entails. Secondly, we want to answer 5 important questions for you. And then finally, we want to model the process as to how you'll use these resources and implement them with your students in your classroom. So then, let's look at the 5 steps to setting up your On to the Finish Line plan.
Acuity formative assessments are administered 3 times per year. In Indiana, these are aligned, of course, to our state standards. The assessment window is normally around the end of September, December 1st, and the end of February. The purpose is to check to see if our students are on target for achieving grade level proficiency. In other states, Acuity, of course, is also aligned to Common Core standards. Over the years, our professional development has focused on the use of data resulting from Acuity assessments. We've also focused on assigning instructional resources that help shore up these skills, and also on building customized formative assessments. However, we wanted to streamline the process and bring more clarity to the process for our teachers. As we all know and experience, we have new teachers each year, and it takes a continuous focus to ensure that those new to the program know how to use all aspects of the Acuity program Therefore, professional development is never finished. It's in a constant state of motion. During the school year this year and in past years, the administration looks closely at our district data. The teachers only see the data from their students. We felt that it was important for all teachers to see corporation data and trends so that they could determine if their pacing, curricular focus, or critical grade level standards or their instructional strategies may need modification in the classroom. Of course, in sharing this information, we didn't include student names, but we were looking at third grade students as compared to fifth grade students as compared to eighth grade students. So we worked with McGraw-Hill to develop this aspect of professional development, and we were able to provide our administrators and teachers with this information and this professional development after the Acuity C assessment at the end of February. With this process, the teachers were able to modify instruction based upon these specified areas of need. These also provided all resources at the teacher's fingertips. In doing so, teachers could move confidently toward the end of the year, knowing that they were preparing for the students for the next grade level by filling in the areas that individual students required. As a result, we customized the professional development to include a video, which we just shared the very first part of that, explaining the process as we looked at district data. We also selected instructional resources that are aligned to the skills that needed shoring up. We also developed grade level matrices in math and English language arts. And in these matrices, they're really helpful because they point out the critical standards. They break it down into understandable language or definitions such as being able to apply the properties as strategies to multiply and divide rational numbers. These skills also correspond to hot links that connect to Acuity resources for additional practice and instructional resources. So as you look at this particular slide, you see that there are 6 columns as we go across. And where you see the light blue, those are some of the hot links that will take a teacher right into Acuity so that when they look at whether or not for language arts or mathematics that we need to shore up a particular standard, it breaks it down into the standard and the skills. We also went as far as to break down the procedures that the teachers would use to appropriately address the skills. Lastly, we provided checks for understanding in the process. And so this professional development was very helpful because it modeled the process for our teachers. Acuity C is administered around the mid to the end of February. We know that we still have 3 months to have our students ready for advancing to the next grade level. So this procedure was very important to making sure that we had our students ready for the very next grade level. In this next video, Ann Lyra, who's a teacher at Horizon Elementary, talks about the importance of formative assessment and how she uses this information in her classroom. Small group instruction as well as whole group needs at times. Matrix reports standards, questions that trip them up the most, and reteaching and teaching so that students are prepared with standards and skills that also can be used as testing tools.
Hello, I'm Ann Lyra, and I teach at Horizon Elementary School, and I currently teach the 4th grade. And I use formative assessments on a daily basis to either identify students who need extra work in small groups, or sometimes it drives my whole class instruction. And the most relevant formative assessment that we use is the Acuity. And what I appreciate most about the reports that I get from Acuity, it's the matrix report, that it breaks everything down into standards, and I'm able to see which students got the answer correct, which students answered incorrectly, and also the question that tripped them up the most. So Acuity also has given us a lot of additional resources, and what they've done is they've set up lesson plans for us. So if there's a certain skill that my students are struggling with, I can easily go back in to the Acuity format and pull up sample questions, as well as use a lot of the other lesson plans and resources that are paper and pencil resources. And what I have found over the years, if we can start with the QDA and find the skills that the children are struggling with, I can teach and reteach, and we don't see those mistakes coming up quite so frequently. So therefore, by the time the students get to the I-STEP test, they're prepared, not only for the skills, but also using the testing tools and the testing strategies.
This next slide takes us to polling question number 2 about formative assessment. And the question is whether formative assessments, are they equated with a grade or other value-laden appraisal for students? So take a few moments and respond to that if you would. There's a mix as to whether or not the assessments are equated to a grade or not. And some individuals answer yes, and some individuals answer no. One of the most important parts that we want to look at as we examine changing our practices and cultures for learning, it's essential that we also address the reasons for formative assessment. And as we do that, we develop different types of formal and informal assessments. Oftentimes the conversation about these types of assessments come about with us as professional learning communities. And one of the things that we also talk about is whether or not we want students to feel safe and be able to take a risk in their learning environments. And in order to do so, keeping the formative assessments free from applying grades or values is very beneficial for students, because they all become very apprehensive about any kind of check for understanding or any kind of informal assessment, because they think it's going to ultimately affect the grade that they're given. And so we have found that even though this is part of the learning process for us as professionals, that we need to be able to move beyond that and to be able to make the changes so that formative assessment remains free of value. Lastly, we're going to look at strategy number 6, which is the collaborative partnership for learning. And although this is listed as strategy number 6, it's possibly the most important. In his video about professional development, Dr. Thacker talks about the triangle of success. This continuous triangle consists of the students, families, and the school, and each of these constituencies is vital to student success. With the use of formative assessment, it's important for the students to also take ownership for the progress and to be part of the plan for improvement. In order to do so, the students should be involved with goal setting as well as monitoring their data. By taking ownership, the student becomes far more active in the learning process. We also discussed that when collaborating as professional learning communities, teachers also set learning goals for their classes as well as for their individual students. When the teacher and student have conversations about the student's progress, it enables the student to become an active learner. When a student becomes active rather than passive in the learning process, their engagement and self-assessment of their progress also helps drive their learning. This process is especially important at the secondary levels, where traditionally less communication has transpired between school and home. In this webinar, we've talked about 6 essential strategies that contribute to good learning every day, and these use the formative assessment process. We talked about the essential role of professional development, transforming the learning process, building and reformatting the power of team, the authentic preparation for college and careers, strengthening teacher resources, and collaborative partnerships for learning. If you're considering the use of formative assessments, I would strongly encourage you to do so. And if you're somewhere in the continuum of the process, I would encourage you to stay the course. The climate of learning takes time to change, but when you see how this positively changes how effective learning transpires, it's worth the journey. I would look forward to answering any questions you may have. And one of the questions that I see is regarding professional development. The question is, has professional development been directed toward the administrative team as well as the teachers? And the answer is most assuredly it has been, because we all need to be able to learn and be able to move ourselves collectively together as professionals. And so this isn't a process that only highlights or focuses on one group of individuals. This is for all of us. And so as we talk about the use of data, that has been a key piece of working with our principals, working administratively across the district, as well as with the teachers, with instructional assistants who might also be looking at some of the data or helping to compile some of the data for us. So this is a collective engagement, and I would also say that we've all learned well together. I would look forward to sharing additional information with you. If you send me a note in the chat box with your email, I can share more information with you. And I thank you for joining me for the McGraw-Hill Education Actionable Assessment webinar, and this was on student success on high-stakes assessments.